So anyway, welcome to the Cervena Barva Press reading series. And tonight we have Olena Jennings and Ned Randle. So I'm really excited to hear them both tonight. And before I introduce Olena, I would like to show her book, Temporary Shelter. And it was such an honor to publish this book. So thank you, Olena.
Thank you, Gloria.
Olena is the author of the novel I just showed you, and we released it recently this year. She is also the author of the poetry collection Songs from an Apartment and a chapbook memory project. Her translation with Oksana Lutsyshyna of Artem Chekh's Absolute Zero was released in 2020 by Glagoslav. She is the founder and curator of the Poets of Queens reading series. And I give you Olena.
Thank you so much, Gloria. It's an honor to be here tonight. I'm going to read a short introduction to Temporary Shelter, and then I'm going to read an excerpt. Temporary Shelter. We are connected through the idea of death. I am in love with the intensity of funerals. They make me want to both laugh and cry. I have laughed so hard my stomach hurt, facing my own reflection in church bathrooms, horrified. I have made dates at funerals. I went out with someone who had seen the same rubbery face, the blushing cheeks. I saw him across from me as the casket was carried and lowered into the ground. On the date, I was so nervous that I drove down country roads without lights on and wondered why it was so dark. I parted the darkness with darkness. We went to a bar where the lights flashed like gold from the icons at the church during the funeral. We drank neon cocktails. The liquid glowed through our straws. I had been going to that church since I was a child, so I should have been prepared for whatever took place inside. The pews shone with varnish that I would try to prevent myself from digging my nails into. The scent of the incense puffing from the golden censer made me dizzy, made me float with the sound of the choir. The scent made me come close to fainting. I would go outside and sit on the back porch until the feeling passed. The neighborhood was full of chipping paint, and I sat facing a broken window, trying to envision the life inside. Anna spent time at funerals, lingering at the peripheries. The wind blew through her dark dress, the fabric becoming light as a spirit's. She liked to watch the processions, the lines of people mourning. She liked a reason for her sadness. I overlooked this in my research. We are connected through the idea of an attempt at death. When I started to research Akhmatova, I was certain that I wouldn't live another 5 years. I repeated the mantra I had learned from an Arundhati Roy book, a viable, dieable age. I had reached that age. I became obsessed with death and cats. It was my own death that I thought of, dipping dangerously beneath the bathwater. It was the cat I longed for that would cross my mind. The cats emerged from the duffel bag that the man from the shelter carried them in. He didn't own a phone, and since my buzzer didn't work, he would ask random people on the street to borrow a phone. He had long, stringy hair and smelled of cat urine. The cat explored the apartment while the kitten hid on the other side of the bookcase. The kitten's fur was matted, and she slept in my bed purring all night. They took over the apartment, their claws bringing up the rug, and finally, there was a large leak, and they scratched at the water on the walls as if trying to escape. That's when I decided to move too. Death was stuck in my head like a bad song. I was translating a poem but my teacher in Russia told me to stick to writing. She spoke about her friend who she accompanied to a dacha. The friend came away with a poem, and she was jealous of her friend who attended the same events, but experienced so much more. Translating was my attempt both at Russian and writing. I was weaving. There was physicality in the words, translating them from what was in the books. The dictionary was heavy on my bed. The words jumped out at me. I wrote them in my notebook with Russian actor Oleg Manchikov on the cover. The notebook was full of graph paper. The room was as narrow as those lines. The windows were also decorated with their own graph paper, crisscrossed green. It was in Russia that I became obsessed with Akhmatova, going to book fairs to seek out copies of her collections. I was drawn to the way she didn't care what anyone thought of her. I imagined her swimming across the river in her nightgown, the fabric clinging and transparent against her body. I walked from the apartment out into the autumn. Sometimes the falling leaves repeated my sadness. Sometimes I was unexpectedly happy. I was translating her life into the pages of this novel. Nothing was exactly as it happened. Some things were exactly as they happened, but to me and not to Akhmatova. And this is the excerpt from later on in the book. Olga was performing at the Stray Dog Cabaret in the basement of building number 5, St. Michael's Square, not far from Nevsky Prospect. Anna was going to the Stray Dog and was just as excited as she was when she was going to the tower for the first time. The bright walls were painted with unidentifiable birds that flew into geometric flowers and became them wings bleeding into petals. The flowers were all scarlet, burgundy, sky blue, and the transparent green of gooseberries, the flowers of evil. The artist had given his composition a Baudelairean theme. Paper lanterns hung over naked walnut tables. When Anna arrived, a man beat the drum that welcomed everyone as they walked down the staircase. Anna could feel the pounding in her chest. Suddenly, Mayakovsky, the poet renowned for his performances, was beside them. He kissed her hand. Then he took Anna's small hand in his large hand. What fingers, so beautiful. She frowned and turned away so that she could cease to notice he was much taller than she was. He was a bear with a bristly face and dark clothes. Alexei was also there. In Anna's bestiary, he was the walrus. A pipe streamed from his mouth, a solitary tusk. The hair peeked unevenly from the skin above his lips. An ostrich feather stuck from his wife Sophia's hat, adding a half meter to her height. Count Zubov was another guest. He came dressed as Pushkin's Onegin. He wore silk pantaloons that made his legs into red blossoms. Shiny buckles decorated his shoes. The recitation of the dog's hymn that Vsevolod had written started off the performance. Oddly, Vsevolod was nowhere to be found. By the time everyone barked its end, ruff, ruff, they had lost themselves. After the hymn, the room filled with laughter and loud voices accentuated by the clink of glass. Michal was at the piano playing wispy music. Hardly any light was focused on the stage area. Sergei, who had returned from Moscow, sat near the stage, using his breath to push confetti from his palm. Olga came into view as the thick smoke from the men's pipes dissipated. Underneath her light blue coat trimmed with swan feathers, she wore a black ball gown. The satin glistened like a mermaid's scales as she began to move. Her large eyes looked out into the audience. She performed a short excerpt from a play in which she proclaimed, "I am the soul of vaudeville, carried to the Stray Dog Literary Cabaret on the wind. I am the candle flame that the musicians light when they compose, the glitter in the eyes of women who have just fallen in love, and the glistening of the tassels that hang from a soldier's epaulets, giving him a sense of dignity before war." Then she danced a traditional mazurka. The audience laughed. Where was her embroidered shirt? the wreath of flowers she was supposed to be wearing around her head, and her heavily painted smile. Hey, 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 everyone clapped as Olga did a spin. Some of the swan feathers flew into the audience and created clouds. It was the first time that Anna was seen Olga perform. Her reverence for Olga, or rather jealousy, burned. She had smoked her cigarette down to its end, and she could hardly feel the hot tip in her hand. Olga belonged in that cabaret. Her body bled into the wall. She was one of the flowers. A stranger sitting next to her quickly handed her another cigarette. Anna was in love with someone who could overpower her. She was in love like she couldn't love God. Boris announced Anna Akhmatova will read Nikolai Gumilyov's poems from the place where it is summer in January. Yes, my friends, he is in Africa again, collecting poems and artifacts. Anna went up to the stage. She paused for a moment to let the imaginary neck of a giraffe stretch itself out before her, as it would have on one of the pretend safaris she used to take with Nikolai. Today, I noticed, she began with an untitled poem. The look on your face is especially mournful. As she read, she felt her disdain for Nikolai's adventures blossom. Wonderful, Vladimir said, his teeth glowing. Wonderful. Everyone loved it, Boris told her. Thank you. Have you noticed, Vladimir began, that Vsevolod isn't here? He must have made other plans for New Year's, Boris said. Maybe he fell in love, he added. Anna turned to him, shocked. I think I could sit for 10 years in the same chair with Sergei, Olga whispered to Anna as they went to finish off their evening in Olga and Sergei's apartment. I should leave you two alone, Anna said as they emerged from the dark basement of the Stray Dog. There was an intimacy about going home with a couple in love. Anna unraveled herself more from Nikolai each time he traveled, and she convinced herself she no longer knew what love felt like. A deep quiet overcame Anna. She worried that the quiet night might be making her invisible, but Olga grabbed her hand. Olga's other arm was wrapped around Sergei, her hand on his waist. That night, she seemed to feel she had something to prove by mentioning her love for him every couple of minutes. Then there was the quiet of the young poet and soldier, Vsevolod. Anna could not help but worry that he was too young to understand that Olga was playing when she proclaimed her love for him. Why hadn't he been at the Stray Dog that night when he knew Olga would be performing? Olga was tall and stunning beside Anna. She placed her emerald-colored boots clumsily against the street. They were all tired, drunk. Sergei wasn't wearing a hat, and his ears were shiny and red. I don't understand the poems. I've never been to Nikolai's Africa before, much less Africa. You separate the two? Anything seen through Nikolai's eyes cannot be itself, Anna explained. Have you ever been tempted to go? Olga asked. Sometimes Anna found her own lack of desire incomprehensible. The treasures of a whole continent were spread out before her, and she had no wish to inspect them. She had a tendency to ignore his souvenirs. She was content in Russia and needed to believe that true happiness was impossible. Never, Anna answered. As a matter of fact, I don't know what Nikolai sees in travel. He only talks about the fevers, the sunburns, and the long rides on the back of mules. Imagine us riding around on mules, Olga giggled. It would be a fairy tale. After walking only a few blocks on Nevsky Prospect, they reached the building where Sergei and Olga lived. They walked through the tight space between buildings where there were almost in complete darkness, so that Anna had to grab onto Olga's shoulder, letting Olga lead her. On any other night, if they walked up the back stairs, the dinner scents would have already settled into the pores of the kitchens. Tonight, there was the smell of fish. Anna breathed it in, imagining a family still seated at their table for a holiday celebration. No doubt they would have been eating caviar, transparent red beads breaking between teeth, releasing their saltiness. They would have also been mandarin oranges stacked in bowls taken down from the highest shelves for the occasion. Anna imagined the plates of cold cuts, thin pieces laid limply over each other, the cloudiness of the fat of bacon. Of course, there were the salads, vegetables minced into tiny squares that sometimes made them unrecognizable. The squares of potatoes, ham, peas, and eggs were all the same size and smothered in mayonnaise. The cabbage rolls had probably all been eaten. Only a vaguely transparent tomato sauce, a lonely mushroom, and a dangly piece of cabbage would have been left on the plate. Dinner at the Stray Dog hadn't included any of these delicacies. There, Anna ate a sour pickle and delicately let a piece of meat slither into her mouth. There was the chirping of the canary. Then there was a shrill cry. Anna realized the sound of loose terror came from her own body. He was here the whole time. Shh, Sergei said. We don't want the neighbors to know. Anna bent down, her tight dress resisting. She lifted Vsevolod's head. Blood had already dried around his mouth and made her dizzy in her drunken state. Vsevolod had succeeded in doing what Anna had failed to do. Olga was pressed against the wall. Her swan feathers were crushed against the cold stone. He committed suicide for you, Anna wanted to say. The words echoed so loudly in her body. It is as if she was actually saying them. She could feel their contours pushing up against her skin. He is yours were words that never emerged from Anna's mouth. Let's go inside while I go get someone, Sergei said and took Vsevolod underneath the arms, dirtying his New Year's garb. Sergei left him in the front entrance next to the umbrellas, the slippers, and a pair of Olga's boots. Vsevolod faced his own reflection in the hall mirror. Olga lowered his eyelids so that he could no longer see himself. The canary continued singing. Olga opened its tiny cage door and it flew out in a bright yellow splash. It landed on Vsevolod's shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you, Olena. That was wonderful. It brings the book to life hearing you read. And our next reader is Ned Randle. His debut novel, Baxter's Friends, was released in 2013 by Coffeetown Press. And his novel, Down Cemetery Road, I published last year. And this is it. It was a prequel to Baxter's Friends, and it was released, like I said, last year. And the third, St. Michael Poker and Drinking Club, was released March 27th, 2020 by Regal House Publishing and was a finalist in the National Indie Excellent Awards. And I give you Ned.
Thank you. I want to thank Gloria for inviting me to do this and also taking a chance on this book. It's a little bit different, but she saw something in it, and I think, and I appreciate that. I'm going to start out with a real brief prologue to this book because it kind of sets the whole environment for the story. As teenagers, we were, in the autumn of 1965, really just children. And as children, each boy had a mother and a father. In those days, a boy's mother was a minor planet in his universe, suspended in an ellipse at the edge of his solar system. Not irrelevant, but just incidental. On the other hand, the father was a closely orbiting moon whose movements and moods affected the ebb and flow of his son's personal tides. Chapter 2. Here I sit, a paunchy, middle-aged man staring across the desk at the doctor in the tweed jacket and scuffed loafers, telling him the story about my father, about the house he built, and his unreasonable reaction to the mail. It's a story I've turned over in my mind many times since I was a teenager, but never told anyone, and I feel awkward and embarrassed in its telling, even to a doctor. I'm telling the story in response to his question as to why a seemingly likable and mellow man like me would want to give up the relatively small amount of life I had left by ending it all now. I smiled at his use of the word mellow, a term from my youth, a patronizing attempt to relate. I dislike him, not only because of his patronization, but because no one before had so starkly framed the question. I sat quietly giving my answer due thought before I replied. The doctor cleared his throat to prod me, but I wouldn't be hurried. I finally told him I believed I was traumatized by war, He asked me in what way, and I began the story about the mail. As I best recall the end of the story, with me in my bed, balanced tensely on my side, knees drawn up to my belly, hands pinched between my thighs, sweating from anxiety while shivering from frustration. I choked on a score of curses and retorts, and the choking left me mute. 17 and almost a man, as I've been reminded repeatedly when it was to someone else's advantage to do so, and I was curled up like a frightened child, silent and disgusted with myself. I should have seen the confrontation over the mail coming and been prepared. But I was so tired when I left my after-school job, all I could think of was about crawling into bed and getting some sleep. Once in the house, I walked past the kitchen and saw a plate of cold food covered with saran wrap sitting on the table, but I was too tired to eat. I tell the doctor the image of the leftover food on the green Melmac plate is as fresh in my mind as any image from those days, and ask him to explain the significance, but he only shrugs and tells me to go on. In any event, I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, closed the door, and in my fatigue forgot to lock it. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled off my shoes and socks. I stood up and finished undressing, hanging my shirt and slacks on the back of the desk chair. I looked at several pieces of unopened mail scattered across the desktop, as if they'd been smacked into disarray by the hefty white envelope, which appeared to have been thrown on the desk from the doorway. I didn't recall seeing my desk in that condition when I left for school that morning, but I was tired then as well and may not have noticed. I picked up the white envelope and looked at the return address and saw it was a catalog and application materials I'd requested from State University located about 200 miles north of my hometown. For a couple of months, I'd been researching colleges. I explained to the doctor I'd go to the guidance counselor's office and look through the catalogs and send away for materials if a school piqued my interest. I prepared the letters at my desk at home behind the locked door and mailed them at the post office. I had accumulated materials from several schools and stacked the envelopes neatly on the corner of my desk, face down, waiting for a quiet time to go through them. Now, however, the envelopes were scattered across the desktop, and the disarrangement was unsettling. I placed the most recent arrival on the corner of the desk and placed the others in an orderly stack on top it. After turning off the light, I rolled the stand holding a small portable black and white television close to my bed and crawled between the sheets. I turned on the set, keeping the volume low. My room was dimly lit by an eerie gray-green glow from the television screen, the color of the melancholy that now envelops me. I reached over, twisted the channel knob until I found an old Western. I wasn't a big fan of Westerns, I explained to the doctor, but the movie had a sleepy soundtrack, and I soon dozed off. I roused myself and turned off the television and settled into bed and fell sound asleep. I was startled by a loud bang as my bedroom door struck the baseboard. The ceiling light flashed on, and I shielded my eyes with the back of my hand. I squinted at the doorway and saw my father standing in his undershirt and unzipped trousers, splay-footed and listing back and forth, right hand on the wall near the light switch for balance. His eyes, bleary and red-veined, narrowed as he staggered to my desk. Holding onto the back of the desk chair with his left hand, he picked up the stack of envelopes with his right. "What the hell is this?" he growled as he fanned the air with the envelopes. He stared at me a minute, impatient for an answer. "Are you deaf?" I said, "What the hell is this?" "College applications," I answered weakly. I was so tired I could barely speak. I was on my right side facing the desk, and my knees instinctively drew up towards my chest. My heart was pounding, and I swallowed repeatedly. "Where'd they come from?" "I sent for them." "What the hell for?" "I need to make plans." "To hell with your damn plans," he slurred, leaning to his right as if the weight of the mail was pulling him over. "Your plans are made. You're going to the junior college and work at the store and Stay right here, you hear, where I can keep an eye on you to make sure you don't mess up school and lose your student deferment. It's settled. Quit screwing around with this crap and get with it. You hear? Yes. What'd you say? I said yes. He took 2 unsteady steps towards my bed, stopped, tossed the mail on the desk, grabbed the back of the chair again for balance, waited until his legs were under him, and then turned towards the door. It's settled, damn it. It's all settled. He turned off the light, staggered out, slammed my door, and made his way across the hall. I heard him rattle his bedroom doorknob, open the door, and slam it closed. I waited anxiously for loud voices, but only heard the creak and sigh of the box springs as he flopped on his bed. I listened a while longer, but didn't hear anything. I lay on my side, knees drawn up to my chest, cramped and miserable, hoping to fall asleep, but I couldn't. My stomach and throat burned from acid, and I was nauseous. I wanted to get out of bed and go to the bathroom to vomit, but I was too tired, and I didn't want to rouse him. So I stayed in bed, curled up, swallowed repeatedly, and waited for the nausea to subside. I finally fell asleep. I quietly wait for the doctor to comment on my story. He stares at me, his face blank and untelling as he tries to adjudge the relevance of my story to the question he posed. He can be obtuse and not the least bit intuitive, which is problematic for a doctor in his specialty. I've been seeing him for several months, and his insensitivity, as well as the look and smell of him, annoys and distracts me. He's a nauseating little man, careless with his sniffs and sneezes and coughs and unaware of their offensiveness. I never see him use a Kleenex. He sneezes and coughs and swallows and draws his forefinger under his nostrils like a fiddle bow until my stomach roils. He sweats easily for a small man and exudes an alphabetical aroma of anise, bay leaf, cardamom, and dill. He dresses poorly. For every office visit, he shows up in the same ugly jacket, wearing the same dumpy shoes, coughing the same morning phlegm, and exuding the same spicy air. He is middle-aged, as I am now, but feminized both as to features and affect, as some middle-aged men are. But I don't think he's a queer, at least not openly. On his credenza is an array of framed pictures of the matronly wife who cooks too much with condiments, his adult children, and his children's spawn. I'm impatient to try to connect the dots for him by briefly explaining how I suspected my father may have suffered during the war and took to drink and consequently made my life a hell I've roasted in for over 60 years. He shrugs, and after a long phlegmy cough suggests that at my age, and in view of the fact my father is long dead, I shouldn't dwell on unhappy incidents like the mail incident. Besides, he says, the theory of blaming the father for the son's maladjustment is passé as far as theories go. Lastly, he tells me I shouldn't dwell on things I can do nothing about. I don't find his comments inspired. He then suggests I recall happy stories from my youth, write them down when I feel the noose dangling too near my neck. Do you understand, Mr. Billy Bright? He asked. I'm also distracted by the way he pronounces my full name, stretching his fractured contralto over 2 octaves, the Bright trailing off more as a warble than a word. It reminds me of the sing-song sound of my name spoken by someone else many years ago. He coughs and swallows and sniffs and coughs again, and his repellent noises make it impossible for me to recall from whom I had previously heard this arioso sound of my spoken name. In any case, in response to his suggestion, I tell him I doubt I can come up with enough happy stories to fill half a page. Undeterred, he taps the desktop at each separate suggestion and said, Mr. Billy Bright, you should think about good times with friends, or your first job, or your first girlfriend. He continues to rattle off an exemplary list of people, places, and events normally assume to season a man's life with the salt and pepper of joy and salt and sugar of the joy and happiness. Good stuff, good stuff, good stuff, he croaks as he taps. Indeed, a feminine approach to therapy, I think, as he sends me on my way. As I reach the office door, I turn to see his practiced smile. He waggles a forefinger and admonishes me to come to our next session with a good start on the exercise. During our next session, I tell the doctor I've been considering events that took place before I was born, and in appreciation, he raises a shaggy eyebrow over the frame of his glasses and offers a slight smile, nods, coughs, swallows, and tells me to go on. I've also recalled events from when I was a little boy, I add, which also seems to please him. But mostly, I've been writing down memories from high school. The doctor removes his glasses, closes his eyes, pinches the bridge of his nose, opens his eyes, and says, "High school? Really? How cliche." Cliche is all I can mutter. I see no reason to explain to him how his sing-song way of saying my name set me on a path heading backward nearly a half century along the path I rediscovered, and along the path I rediscovered memories from a transformative time in my life. Although many are not happy memories, as I understood as I began to write them down, but I understood that these memories were always with me over the long passage of time, and I'd employed them as personal lodestars to help me keep my bearings, although I didn't recognize their balefire function until now. From his comments and the quizzical look in his eyes, I assumed, perhaps wrongly, his was and is a life both privileged and constrained, and the panorama of his life and of his experiences as a teenager, continuing to today, is brown, complainant, and unvaried, with no particular place or time or incident more colorful or memorable or meaningful than any other. He smiles and shrugs one shoulder and pushes my prescriptions towards me. Perhaps you should focus on the time your malady began. Begin at the beginning, he says, as I start out the door, revealing more insight than I'd given him credit for. Yes, the beginning, I agree. Where is the beginning? I ask myself as I drive home. The true beginning is imperceptible or unknowable, I concede, causing me to ascribe to an arbitrary place or an arbitrary time or an arbitrary event the mystical log name of my myth. Since the narrative of my malady begins as an artifact, not through deception, because the true provenance is indeterminable. The beginning of the tale is much like discrete waters of a stream contained within the bounds of a mountain lake. Although an observer can recognize the headwaters, as soon as they spill over the brim, who can say he readily recognizes the stream when immingled with the water within the pool? Surely the headwaters are dissoluble yet distinct, but we do not recognize them in their source because we lack the ability to see their distinctiveness within the torrent. Similarly, the beginning of my story, of my malady, is indistinguishable from its source, and as such, I pick a point near the provenience where people, places, and events begin to take form apart from their aboriginal pool and begin to course down the mountainside of memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Ned. That was wonderful. And now I'd like to turn it over to RJ to handle the Q&A. So RJ?
Hi, wonderful readings. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very talented writers. Yes, if you'd like to ask a question of our guests, please just feel free, raise your hand or just unmute yourself. Well, I would like to ask a question. Your writing routine, how you sort of, do you set aside a time ahead of time? Do you block a certain amount of hours in a day or in a week? Do you set up kind of a writing environment, milieu, place where you feel most comfortable? Can you write like in a crowd? Just curious about your process in regarding creating and writing. Olena, I'd like to have you answer my question first, if you will, please.
So I don't set certain hours every day, but I do try to write every day. And I sometimes wait for inspiration, but not always. Usually I try, especially with fiction, try to kind of get through the tough moments. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else that you had in mind?
I have another question I ask myself every time I write something, and that is, when do you know it's done?
Oh, I feel it's almost never done. That every time I look at it, I notice a line that could be different, or a word just that seems to be out of place. So eventually, I think when I find that someone is asking for it, asking to see it, maybe a friend who's reading it over, then I'll say, okay, this is done for now. But there's always an opportunity, I think. I mean, after it's published, not really, but there's always an opportunity to go back and look and see where it can be just a little better.
I can certainly relate, and I'm sure that everyone here feels the same way. Ned, would you please respond to my question as well? And thank you.
Sure.
Wonderful answer.
Sure, thank you. I don't have a particular routine. I try to do something every day. Some days I do more. I keep track of the number of words I've written in a given day and keep them on a spiral notepad so I can see some progress. But I don't have any particular routine. I do keep notepads in my car, on my bedstand, my desk here where I write. I might just write a sentence at a time, a paragraph at a time, something might strike me, and I'll write it down on a notepad, and then I'll elaborate on it later on. But I think that comes from all the years that I wrote a lot of poetry, and you could get a line. Sometimes one line could be a hook, and you can go from there. It's a little different with prose, but yeah, I agree it's never done. I think if you waited till it was done, you would never let go of it. That you thought it was done, you'd never let go of it. But it's kind of like raising your kids. They get to be to a certain age, you got to push them out of the house, and that's the way these manuscripts are. But that's the way I do things.
Your children, what a perfect analogy and metaphor. Perfect. Anyone else have a question for our readers before we say goodnight?
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Matt. First of all, thanks to everyone. Thank you for hosting the reading, and Olena and Ned. Your readings were both very engaging and just really, brought us into the story and what was happening, at the time. And so I have a question for Olena. Of writing Anna Akhmatova, what was the most paramount thing that you wanted to get across with her? And by that, I mean, was it her interior life and her interior feelings? Was it, what she was immersed in and how she reacted to it? Was it like the romances she had and, the ambition for her writing career? And, what was the thing that you wanted to, encapsulate and really deliver? And then that with that thing or not, was it your favorite thing or the easiest thing to write when it comes to writing her? And if it's not your favorite or the easiest, what might have been, the easiest aspect or the most fun thing to write about?
Thank you for the question, Nat. I think the paramount thing was definitely how she became a poet, and specifically what pieces of her life inspired her poetry. And a lot of the times that was something that she was kind of pushing against, like her relationship with Nikolai Gumilyov wasn't always smooth, definitely. And so I guess I want to say that it wasn't always the positive things that led to her poetry, which was something great and something beautiful and just a great legacy. So it was like the relationship with Nikolai, the relationship with Olga, they weren't love poems in the sense that she was inspired by them to always create something beautiful. It was like she was inspired to create, but what came out of it sometimes was very varied. And I think the hardest thing for me was the historical milieu. Yeah, that was I also another hard point was I did a lot of research at first, and it was hard to throw away a lot of the research and focus on only certain aspects or focus on my own inventions.
Thank you so much. I think writing somebody like her must have been just so interesting. And that was going to be my question is, did you feel like you had to stick to what the sort of respected scholarly opinion was for her? Or like, did you, let your creative inspiration and where you felt about her and her poems, in your heart do the talking, or the storytelling?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's definitely that tension between the two.
Cool. Well, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful question, Nat. If there are no more questions, I will pass the baton to Gloria and have her say goodnight. And I want to thank you both for your beautiful readings. And I look forward to getting both of your books.
Thank you so much, Olena and Ned, for reading tonight. And to those of you that attended tonight, thank you so much. And again, I'd like to say you brought both books to life. It was so nice to hear your voice behind it, because when I'm reading and laying out books, it's just nice to hear your voices with it. So thank you so much. And can we give the readers another round of applause?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you so much. And that's it for tonight. So thank you and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Gloria. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.